Okay, so before we begin our Q&A session for today, I'd like to thank Laura for giving us the scrumptious, delicious carrot cake to celebrate her birthday. It's not easy to practice generosity, and as practitioners on the Buddhist path, one of the prerequisites for the practice is generosity and virtue. We have to show gratitude and appreciation for the people around us. And generosity is one of the ways that we can give back to the people around us, because all of us are in this together. We share similar sufferings, and when we can learn to empathize and sympathize with other people, then we give rise to this breadth and expansiveness in our minds. And that's why it's so important for people who want to pursue the Buddhist practice to practice generosity first. So you'll notice that in Thailand and in other Southeast Asian countries, a lot of the monks, they go begging for alms, and they rely on the support of the lay community. They rely on their generosity to maintain their bodies, to maintain their practice. And by doing that, we're sowing the seeds for awakening. We're giving rise to a sense of expansiveness in the mind and spaciousness. And that becomes really noticeable when you do your meditation. Because if you're normally really used to giving, then you have that spaciousness in your mind, and you're accepting, you're more compassionate. It helps you develop in your concentration. So thank you to Laura for that cake. So the first question, Dear Venerable Hong, thank you for another great talk and session today. I'm wondering what are some good ways to increase compassion and practices to give compassion to others. So I guess maybe you weren't here when I talked about the Brahma Viharas, the four sublime attitudes. The attitude of loving kindness, compassion, empathetic joy, and equanimity. But before we get into the actual practice, we should have a basic understanding of what these four attitudes are. So when we say loving kindness and goodwill, we're wishing that ourselves and all other beings can be happy, can not only receive the benefits of happiness, but can actively sow the causes that will lead to their future happiness. So there are times when you might come across someone that you find it very hard to have compassion towards, because that person maybe did something that makes you very upset, or you're affected by that person's behavior, attitude. So in times like that, it can be very difficult to wish that person happiness. But when you understand that loving kindness is not just happiness, but more about wishing that the person sows the causes for happiness, then it becomes a lot easier to do. Because that person could be doing a lot of things that are harming other people now. But you want that person to understand that the nature of his or her actions leads to unhappiness. So you want that person to start sowing the right causes. So when you come to think of it from that perspective, it becomes a lot easier to feel loving kindness towards another person. Now, compassion is very much related to loving kindness. Compassion is an extension of it. So when you see other people experiencing suffering, you want to find a way to put an end to their suffering. Empathetic joy is when you see someone else experiencing the fruits of their good causes and wholesome actions. They experience happiness, and you want them to continue to feel that happiness. So instead of giving rise to feelings of jealousy or envy for that person's happiness, you want it to continue. You genuinely want that person to experience continued happiness. And finally, there's equanimity. Equanimity is, you can think of it as a check on the other three, because there are times when you want to feel compassion and loving kindness towards that person, and you actively try really hard to do it, but because the karma is just so strong, there's nothing you can do right now to change it. So in times like that, you have to learn how to be at peace, how to be equanimous with your experience. So taken together, these are the 4 sublime attitudes, and this sets the basis for the practice of loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. And we go about practicing this through meditation on the theme of these 4 attitudes. So there's different kinds of meditation practices that we can use. What I've found to be effective for myself is I first examine what is the problem I'm experiencing. Do I feel a lack of self-compassion for myself? Am I really hard on myself all the time? Do I always beat myself up for not doing well enough? If that's the case, then you have to learn how to develop self-compassion for yourself. And for many people, this is the case. It's not as difficult to show compassion and loving kindness to someone around them than it is to show it to themselves. And so when we first start off this practice, you can close your eyes and imagine yourself in a situation where someone needs your attention, someone needs your care and support. And everyone is going to be a bit different. So you try to find that story. You create a new storyline for yourself where you try to exude compassion to that person. So say, for example, if you have a particular soft spot for kids and babies, then you can imagine yourself cuddling a baby in your arms, showing that baby warmth and compassion. And you use that as a way to start to kindle those warm feelings of compassion within you. Because you have to do this in sequence, step by step. You start with the things that it's easy for you to feel compassionate about. So it's easy for you to feel compassionate for your child, or maybe it could be children living in poor communities, living in Africa, suffering from hunger and starvation. You can create that image, that story in your mind, and start to feel a sense of compassion and love for that object. And then as you give rise to this feeling, then you can spread it to people that you're close with. Say your family members, your friends, other people who you find it easy to feel good about, to feel compassionate for. And so you can think of it as the compassion, it's spreading out. So it's starting from a smaller circle, and then it's moving out to a larger and larger circle, encompassing all sentient beings. So if your problem is you're not feeling enough love for yourself, then you can save that as the last person that you show compassion for, because it can be very difficult to do that if you're always so hard on yourself. So you create that image of yourself empathizing with your own experience, empathizing with the suffering that you experience. Just like how your mother or someone that you love would feel compassionate for you when they see you suffering. So in a sense, you're kind of stepping out of yourself and looking at your situation objectively from the eyes of someone who really cares about you. And then so you picture that in your mind, and you start recollecting about things that you're proud about. You start recollecting about your virtue, your generosity, things that can brighten your mind, give rise to this feeling of warmness and compassion in the heart. So that's the practice of metta meditation, and it's a really important part of the practice, developing compassion. We have to both develop our mindfulness and develop our compassion at the same time. We can't have one without the other, because the practice is not just about ourselves. It's about using our practice as a gift to other people. It's about using the virtues and the positive qualities that we develop to spread it to those around us so that they can receive the benefits of the practice. So that, I believe, answers the first question. And this connects to the second question. The second question is, who are the Bodhisattvas? So, Bodhisattva, the Bodhi means awakened, Sattva means being. So a Bodhisattva is a sentient being who is on the path towards awakening, towards enlightenment. And central to the practice of a Bodhisattva is making the Bodhisattva vow. So in our daily prayers that monks and nuns do, we have a section where we recite the four vows of a Bodhisattva. So the four vows are, we must liberate all sentient beings. Sentient beings are limitless, but we vow to liberate them, to help them. That's the first vow. The second vow is mental afflictions are boundless, but we vow to end them. And then the third is the Dharma and the skillful teachings are innumerable, but we vow to learn them. And the fourth is the Buddhist path leading to enlightenment is insurpassable, yet we vow to achieve it. So we recite these 4 vows every day to reinforce that aspiration that we have in ourselves. We want to purify our minds. We want to stay away from committing evil, to practice everything that is wholesome, and to liberate all sentient beings. That's the central tenet of being a Bodhisattva. And Bodhisattvas, they come in different stages. So there's 10 stages in total. But even before you reach the first stage, where you've essentially put an end to all of the fetters that bind you to samsara, so you don't have any doubt about the teachings, about the Dharma anymore. You've eliminated this view of a self-identity, and you're not attaching to your habits and your practices in an unwholesome way. When you've eliminated a lot of these fetters, then that's when you've reached a higher stage on the Bodhisattva path. But even before you reach that first stage, when you make this vow, that's when you begin to walk the Bodhisattva path. That's when you can call yourself an aspiring Bodhisattva. So anyone who's taken the Bodhisattva precepts, we have the 5 precepts, and then beyond that we have what we call the Bodhisattva precepts. And there's different versions of it, but there could be 4 additional major precepts and 41 or 43 minor precepts. So we abide by these training rules so that we can continue to purify our minds to a much more refined level. That's why we take these precepts. We take more precepts not to limit our freedoms. We take more precepts to liberate ourselves from our mental afflictions. Because a lot of times it's by committing and violating these precepts that we end up giving ourselves a lot of trouble. So when you take the Bodhisattva precepts, then you're on your way towards becoming a Bodhisattva. And one of the essential points of being a Bodhisattva is you're walking on this path not for your own benefit. You're walking on this path for the benefit of yourself and all sentient beings. So that's why many Bodhisattvas have made the vow that they won't attain enlightenment until all sentient beings have attained enlightenment. So it's a very noble vow. And all Bodhisattvas possess and embody this vow. So when we go upstairs to circumambulate, we have a few Bodhisattva statues. We have the Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, the Bodhisattva of compassion. We have the Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva on the left-hand side, who is well recognized for the strength of his vow. His vow is not to attain enlightenment until all sentient beings in hell have attained enlightenment. So it's a very noble vow. And there's also Samantabhadra Bodhisattva, Mandrasuri Bodhisattva. There's countless millions of Bodhisattvas. In fact, there could be Bodhisattvas among us here today that we're not aware of. We're all trying to walk this path, and there's different stages that we progress along as we're walking this path. So I hope that answers your question.